Hey again, woodworkers. Alright, so I wanted to talk about hinges in the conversation about building your doors. Obviously, we'll need to hinge this thing somehow, so talking about what it is we're going to use. So in this door we have a pretty classic example of something called a butt hinge, and you can use the butt hinges for an inset door or an overlay door. Technique is very much similar for installation. The only difference is going to be seeing the knuckle of the hinge here in the front, or if it's an overlay door, you'll see that on the edge, and that's kind of the deal. When it's installed correctly, you should have 180-degree opening access to this. It shouldn't pinch, it shouldn't bind. It also shouldn't pinch or bind on the interior of where this edge of the door meets the carcass. This one has not, I haven't finished fitting it here. This edge is a little bit large, but I'll talk about that in the next video about installation of doors. We have to have hinges before it can really fit and size this door into place. Butt hinge. Okay. So, not all hinges are created equal. I've got an example here of a hinge which is impossible to see on camera, but big difference between the one I'm holding and a quote-unquote precision furniture hinge is going to be a couple things. Number one, in how this is made. It's a rolled hinge. So sighting down here, first of all, the anatomy of these things. The pieces here to the sides, these are referred to as the leaf. The part in the center here is the knuckle. The knuckle holds the pin. The pin is everything pivots from that point. So pieces of anatomy that we need to think about. So the knuckle, the leaf, first of all through the knuckle, this was forced or pushed into some kind of a form that has this curl. So as this thing is forced, it follows that form and creates this rounded shape. And that's okay. It's a manufacturing process. That's easy enough to do. But they use a very thin metal in order to get this metal to bend. And so the problem with this is that it's a little bit tougher to hit this mark or this target with this thickness into the installation process. Price is according to what the manufacturing process, how much material goes into it. So these are much less expensive, and I think you can get a set of these for like $6, $7, $8, something like that. And they come in various sizes. But it's not ideal for the installation that we're going to talk about. The other thing that's frustrating about these is that there's a little bit more wiggle between the two leaves. So the areas between the knuckle, so these various pieces, there are 3 knuckle pieces here on this side, 2 on this, and there's a lot of movement in that. So I don't like the movement just because that can translate into your door, and so if that has any type of articulation vertically as this thing is swinging open, or more importantly when it closes, if it's too high or too low, you have to kind of jiggle it in, and it's just a bit of a mess. So anyway, that's that. They come in different finishes. This is also a rolled or a pressed manufactured hinge, and there's a lot more wiggle in it. But the finish here, it's a zinc plated, it's not silver, but it has a different look from brass if you're opposed to brass. Taking a look at this style here, and you really can't catch this on camera, but this is easily twice, if not more, thickness than that of the pressed hinge. And the process by these precision hinges is a little bit different. These ones are polished, but if this was not polished, you would see that there are these scratches that run in the same orientation as the leaf. And what those scratches come from is the extrusion process. So this is actually pressed through a form that takes this shape and then the cylindrical shape here of the knuckle. So it's pressed all the way through, and in that form it develops these little scratches on the interior here. If you want a polished hinge, it's going to be a little more costly. A set like this is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $25, more or less. If you don't have them in your area, usually shipping is the part that's going to kill you on these. So it's a thicker casting here, and that makes us easier for setting these into place. The knuckle here, there's far less gap or movement in this, and the pin on this is much tighter, so we have a much smoother operation of this hinge. Some of these hinges have some decorative features as well. They have these little finials, or these little round knobs, top or bottom, or some type of a decorative extension. Those things work fine. It's all aesthetics. The other thing that sometimes is nice is that these pins are removable, so if you needed to knock these out for reasons of fitting or spacing of these, give that some consideration as far as what you want. I've never used a hinge that has a removable pin because I really haven't needed to. If you're using larger doors, or I'm sorry, if you've built a piece with larger doors, or if you have more than 3 hinges, I think that removable pin sometimes can be really beneficial for fine-tuning and tweaking. Okay, so that's that. And these again come in different lengths and widths. Word to the wise when you're shopping on for these things, depending on the supplier, they will either measure the distance from outside of the leaf to outside of the opposite leaf as the width. Some suppliers count this as the width of the leaf, and then you have to multiply to figure out what the overall dimension is here. The reason that's important is that we want to make sure that these hinges do not extend past the thickness of this door. Or if it were an overlay door, I wouldn't want for the length of this leaf, or pardon me, the width of this leaf to be greater than the wall thickness of the carcass, and then it would extend into the interior of this carcass. The length of these is more or less an aesthetic choice. It really doesn't matter as far as what you wanted to do here, or just what's in keeping with the piece. If I had a really small door, I would hate to have a 3-inch hinge because I think it would be overwhelming and very visually overpowering. So, alright, so that's the application there. These also come in different finishes, so you can get, most of them are all made out of brass. Some of them are in iron, and those are typically larger hinges for either gates or entry doors or something like that, but for fine furniture pieces, usually it's all brass with different platings or coatings on them, or patina. So you can get antique bronze or an oil rub bronze. You can get silver or a zinc plated, so similar look to this one here. And then what is the other one? And then you could also patina these on your own. You don't have to pay for this to happen if you don't like the way this looks. You can always do this on your own. I had a student once who, she had a really fantastic piece, but she incorporated copper on the interior of her carcass, and so finding a copper hinge is virtually impossible, but she did find a place that would do a copper plating, so it would cover the hinge, and it looked really fantastic with that copper look. Alright, they usually always come with screws as well, which is great. Word to the wise, again, make sure that they do come with screws. If they don't, you'll have to buy some of these in hardware stores, not a box store, but Ace, True Value, those type of places. You can buy these individually, or a little box of 100 for, I don't know, 50 cents, 100, I don't know how much it is. It's $3, $4. Well worth it. But you'll want to match the finish of the screw to the finish of the hinge. So just make sure that whatever screws you buy, these things match. One big difference is that, I don't know if you could see, there's also a steel screw in this mix of brass screws, and the steel screw serves a very specific function for the installation. And basically we start with the steel screw, screw that into place, and that threads or taps the hole with the threads for the brass. Even if we pre-drill, which we'll have to do regardless, if we don't tap that hole with the threads of the steel screw, these brass ones are almost guaranteed to shear off as you're driving it in. And it never happens as you start. It happens on that last half turn before you see the head of that screw, and then the head falls off, and all kinds of swearing happens. Okay, so this is a different manufacturer that I've purchased from, and these ones you could just order as many as you wanted. So I got 8 of these. Yeah, 8. And so you could buy these things individually. These, I did not have the polished brass treatment done. I don't know if you can see that, but these ones you could definitely see the extrusions here, or the scratches a little bit more. And I'm not opposed to that. So some people, this is really objectionable. You could always buff these things out or polish them with like a 400 or 420 grit paper, and polish these things out, working up successive coats until the polish is where you want it to be. But it's so minor, and I think these scratches also kind of tell a story about the manufacturing here, and I don't think it's objectionable or offensive. So, okay, there's that. So those are brass hinges. There are other styles of hinges. This one is a, what is this thing called? This is a barrel hinge. And barrel hinges are kind of a different game altogether. I'm going to pull in tighter. So barrel hinges are, the big benefit of these is that they will be hidden. You won't see these things at all. So the process for this is that one would have to drill a hole on the inside edge of the door, and then a corresponding hole in the inside of the carcass. And if you've done that correctly, and that's a big if, then as this thing opens, so the door will open out this way, this part being in the carcass, this part being on the inside of the edge of the door, and then as it closes, you'll never see any of this. These are really fussy because you've got to get the location of this vertically and laterally perfect on both sides. Otherwise, this just doesn't run accurately. But they're really cool in concept. And they come in different sizes. The other option is something called a knife hinge, and so these function very different from a butt hinge, pardon me, and that these are to be mounted on the top of the door and the bottom of the door, so that if the door is resting on this, it'll swing open this way, this side mounted inside your carcass, and the other side here is going to be mounted on the bottom of the door, or if it's on the top of the door, this is going to be to the door, this is going to be to the carcass. These ones are pretty great. This is not a faulty manufacturing. This is how they're designed to come apart. These can only be used on an inset door, cannot be used on overlay, because there's nowhere for this thing to mount to on an overlay door. And some people really like these. They also have a version that have a fulcrum that's outside of the path of the door, which there's benefits of that as well. But instead of having the pivot point be here, the pivot out is out here, so the casting extends out like a little L shape, and then as the door swings, it's not inside of where the door is mounted to the carcass. It's basically outside, which the benefit of that is that it doesn't, as this door opens, this hinge, the inside is going to swing onto the interior of your carcass. And so you'd have to make allowances for that, or clearance for that on the inside. If you have a divider in there or anything you're storing, this could scrape or bind against that. Whereas if the pivot is pulled out here, then the whole thing kind of swings out, and it really doesn't affect what's going on inside. So different sizes of those. You see those hinges. The thing that you're looking for is a precision door hinge, staying away from the cheaper casting ones or pressed hinges here, and the price is going to be the hallmark of this. If you're spending $10 or less on these things, then I think they're going to give you trouble. If you're spending somewhere in the 20s for these, then that makes a little bit more sense. And it's usually, this manufacturer sells them in pairs. Some manufacturers or suppliers will allow you to buy them individually. So ask questions, feel free to figure out what is best for you. But that's kind of a good overview on hinges. Talked about how to install them next. Thanks.